The late October air in Beacon Hill held a deceptive crispness, a glittering polish that mirrored the surface of Eleanor Vance's life. Each morning, as she walked the few blocks from their meticulously restored brownstone on Acorn Street to the sleek Seaport District offices of Vance & Vance Design Collaborative, she felt a sense of quiet accomplishment. The cobblestones under her sensible heels, the russet and gold leaves skittering across the brick sidewalks, the very scent of autumn in Boston. It all felt like a carefully curated backdrop to the life she and Julian had painstakingly built. At 42, Eleanor was a woman who believed in structure, in the elegant equation of effort and reward. Their firm, renowned for its innovative yet respectful approach to historic preservation and modern design, was a testament to this belief. Julian, her husband of 15 years and business partner, was the charming frontman, the networker, while Eleanor was the meticulous mind, the architect whose vision shaped their award-winning projects. Their partnership, like their home, had always seemed a bastion of harmonious collaboration. Lately, however, a dissonant note had crept into the symphony. It began subtly, a faint tremor beneath the foundations of their shared existence. Julian, normally so engaged, so present, had become elsewhere. There were the late nights at the office, attributed to a demanding new client, the hushed phone calls he'd take in the other room, his phone screen angled away if she entered, an uncharacteristic forgetfulness about shared plans, a new cologne she didn't recognize, a sudden, almost performative attentiveness towards her that felt more like compensation than genuine affection. Eleanor, a woman whose professional life revolved around noticing the slightest misalignment in a blueprint, the smallest deviation from a plan, found herself cataloging these inconsistencies with a growing, sickening dread. She tried to dismiss them, to rationalize. Midlife, perhaps? The stress of a particularly complex project? But her intuition, that deeply buried compass she'd learned to trust in the unforgiving world of architecture, hummed with a persistent warning. The evenings in their brownstone, once filled with comfortable conversation over dinner or the quiet rustle of architectural journals, now stretched with an unspoken tension. The gas fireplace, usually a source of cozy warmth, seemed to cast flickering, accusatory shadows on Julian's face as he stared into its depths, his thoughts clearly miles away. Eleanor would watch him, her heart a cold knot in her chest, the questions she dared not voice swirling in the silence. Chloe Maxwell, her closest friend since their days at Wellesley, was her usual effervescent self during their weekly lunches. Chloe, an art consultant with a bohemian flair that Eleanor secretly admired, was the one person with whom she could usually let down her guard. But even with Chloe, Eleanor found herself hesitating, unable to articulate the formless anxieties that plagued her. How could she voice such a base suspicion about Julian, the man Chloe had known almost as long as she had? It felt like a betrayal in itself. "You seem distracted, Elle," Chloe remarked one Tuesday, her brow furrowed with concern as she picked at her salad at their favorite Italian place in the North End. "Everything okay with the Fenway project?" "Just a lot on my plate," Eleanor had murmured, forcing a smile. The lie tasted like ash in her mouth. The Fenway project was proceeding smoothly. It was her life that felt dangerously off-kilter. The unraveling began on a gray November afternoon. Julian was supposedly at a site visit across town. Eleanor, working from home to finalize a crucial presentation, needed a file from their shared cloud storage. She opened the browser on their desktop computer in the study, a stately room lined with books and framed architectural renderings. Julian's email account was still logged in, an oversight so uncharacteristic it sent a fresh jolt of alarm through her. She shouldn't look. It was a violation of privacy, a line she, a believer in boundaries and respect, had never considered crossing. But the nagging unease, now a relentless thrum, overpowered her scruples. Her cursor hovered, then clicked. The inbox was mostly work-related. Then she saw it, a folder titled Personal. Her breath hitched. Inside, a series of email exchanges. The recipient, Chloe Maxwell. The subject lines varied. "Thinking of you. Tomorrow, our little secret." Eleanor's vision blurred. The room tilted. Her hand flew to her mouth to stifle a gasp. With trembling fingers, she clicked open the most recent email, dated only 2 days prior. It was from Julian to Chloe. "C. Can't stop thinking about our conversation. You understand things Elle never could. This pressure with Marcus is immense, but knowing I can talk to you, it means everything. Same time, same place next week? Chloe's reply sent hours later. Always, Jay. You know I'm here. We'll figure out a way through this, all of it. So see. The words weren't explicitly sexual, not in the crude way one might expect. But the intimacy, the shared confidences, the clandestine nature of it, it was a deeper, more insidious betrayal. Our little secret. The phrase echoed in the sudden, roaring silence of the study. Chloe, her friend, her sister in all but blood. Julian, her partner, her rock. The carefully constructed edifice of her life crumbled, floor by floor, until she was left standing in the dust and debris of their shared lies. The pain was a physical entity, a vice constricting her chest, stealing her breath. She sank into Julian's leather chair, the scent of his cologne, the one she now recognized as new and unfamiliar, clinging to the upholstery, a mocking reminder. Disbelief warred with a cold, sickening certainty. Marcus. Julian's influential, somewhat intimidating Uncle Marcus. What pressure was he referring to? And why was Chloe privy to it? The initial shock gave way to a glacial rage, then a profound, hollowing grief. The woman who prided herself on rationality, on control, felt herself fragmenting. For hours, she sat there, the damning emails burning on the screen, the rhythm of her life irrevocably broken. The meticulous plans, the shared dreams, the comfortable future, all of it, a carefully crafted illusion. As dusk settled over Beacon Hill, casting long, melancholic shadows across the expensive Persian rug, a new feeling began to coalesce amidst the wreckage, a steely resolve. Eleanor Vance might be heartbroken, betrayed, but she was not broken. She was an architect. She knew how to deconstruct, to analyze, to find the structural flaws. And then she knew how to rebuild. But first, she needed more than emails. She needed the unvarnished truth, laid bare. Her analytical mind, a tool she'd honed over years of complex problem-solving, kicked into gear, pushing past the searing emotional pain. She wouldn't confront them yet, not with half-truths and digital whispers. She would set a trap, a carefully designed, irrefutable scenario that would force the reality of their betrayal out into the open. The thought brought no satisfaction, only a grim sense of necessity. The quest for truth, however painful, was the only foundation left to stand on. And as she began to strategize, a sliver of ice formed around her heart. This wasn't just about an affair. The mention of Uncle Marcus, the pressure, hinted at something more, something that made the pit of her stomach clench with a new, darker foreboding. The following week was a masterclass in Eleanor's self-control. She moved through her days with an outward composure that belied the maelstrom within. At the office, she was professional, efficient, her interactions with Julian coolly polite. Her tone with Chloe, when they spoke on the phone, carefully neutral. Each feigned smile, each normal conversation was an act of excruciating discipline. The nights were the hardest. Lying beside Julian in their king-sized bed, the space between them a chasm filled with unspoken words and chilling certezas. The scent of his new cologne was a constant, tormenting reminder. She told Julian she had to attend a 2-day architectural symposium in New York. A lie, meticulously crafted with a fake itinerary and booked, then canceled, train tickets. He'd seemed relieved, almost too quickly agreeing it was a great opportunity. Chloe, when Eleanor mentioned it, had offered to keep an eye on things. At the office, her voice laced with a sympathy that now sounded utterly false. On the Friday Eleanor was due to be in New York, she instead checked into an anonymous hotel near Logan Airport under an assumed name. A small, almost childish act of subterfuge that nonetheless made her feel a sliver of control. She spent the day in a sterile room, staring out at the planes taking off and landing, each one a symbol of escape she couldn't yet allow herself. Her plan was simple, born of a desperate need to witness, to understand the full scope of what she was up against. As evening descended, a cold, sleety rain began to fall, a fitting soundtrack to her grim errand. Dressed in dark, unremarkable clothing, a scarf pulled high, she took a cab to the Seaport District, her heart a leaden weight. She'd instructed the driver to drop her a block away from the Vance & Vance offices. The lights were on in their corner suite on the 5th floor. Julian had texted earlier, a brief, almost perfunctory message, working late on the Ashworth proposal. Don't wait up. Love you. The love you was a fresh stab of pain. She knew the building's security codes, the after-hours routines. Using a secondary entrance often used for deliveries, she slipped into the deserted lobby and took the service elevator to the 5th floor. The corridor was silent, save for the hum of the HVAC system. Her shoes made no sound on the carpeted floor as she approached their suite. The main door was locked, as expected. But she also knew Julian often propped open the fire escape door at the back of their office when working late, a habit he claimed helped him think. The fire escape door, as she'd gambled, was slightly ajar. The sleet stung her face as she eased it open further, slipping into the darkened kitchenette area of their office. From there, she could see a sliver of light spilling from Julian's private office, and she could hear voices. Julian's, low and anxious, and Chloe's. Eleanor's breath caught in her throat. Chloe wasn't supposed to be here. This wasn't the romantic tryst she had half expected, half dreaded. This felt different, more urgent, more frightening. She pressed herself against the cool metal of a filing cabinet, straining to hear. Absolutely cannot let this Ashworth thing unravel now, Chloe. Julian was saying, his voice tight with a stress that went beyond any professional deadline. If Marcus finds out we've been careless. I know. Chloe's voice, usually so bright and confident, was thin, strained. But the ledger entries for the preliminary consultations, they don't match the invoices. Sophia Hayes was asking questions about the supplier costs on the Ashworth feasibility study this afternoon. She's too sharp. What if she flags it to Eleanor? Eleanor's blood ran cold. Sophia Hayes, their brightest junior architect, meticulous and honest. Ledger entries? Supplier costs? Marcus? This was far beyond a sordid affair. Julian's voice dropped lower, more desperate. Eleanor can't find out. Not about this. The affair is one thing. She might eventually forgive that. Or at least we could manage it. But this is everything. The firm, the family. Marcus would be furious. He said explicitly, keep it clean. Keep her out of it. Then you need to handle Sophia, Chloe said, a sharp edge to her tone. And you need to be more careful. We both do. This whole thing, it's getting too risky. The zoning for Ashworth is still pending. If anyone starts digging before that's approved. A heavy silence, then Julian sighed, a sound of profound weariness. I know. I never thought it would get this complicated. It was supposed to be a small favor for Marcus, a way to smooth things over after that deal in the Back Bay went south. Eleanor leaned her head back against the filing cabinet, the cold seeping into her bones. Her carefully laid trap for lovers had ensnared something far more sinister. The affair, as devastating as it was, suddenly felt like a smokescreen, a diversion from a deeper, darker conspiracy that implicated her husband, her best friend, and Julian's powerful family. The pressure Julian had mentioned in his email to Chloe wasn't just marital stress, it was the crushing weight of illicit dealings. Numbly, she retreated, pulling the fire escape door closed with a barely audible click. The sleet was turning to ice, coating the streets in a treacherous sheen as she walked blindly towards the main road, her mind reeling. The betrayal was now a monstrous, many-headed beast. Her meticulously constructed world hadn't just cracked. It had been built on a foundation of lies, quicksand threatening to swallow her whole. Back in the sterile anonymity of her hotel room, Eleanor didn't cry. The shock was too profound, the implications too vast. She felt a terrifying clarity, the kind that comes when everything is stripped away. Julian hadn't just broken their vows. He had compromised their integrity, their business, possibly their entire future. And Chloe was enmeshed in it with him. The next morning, she returned to Beacon Hill, the symposium supposedly over. The charade continued, but now it was imbued with a chilling new purpose. She confronted Julian and Chloe, but only about the affair. As expected, there were tears, Chloe's, protestations, Julian's, weak and unconvincing, and eventually shame-faced confessions. Julian pleaded for forgiveness, spoke of a terrible mistake, a moment of weakness. Chloe stammered apologies, her eyes darting nervously, unable to meet Eleanor's steady, accusing gaze. Eleanor listened, her expression unreadable, her heart a frozen stone. She played the part of the betrayed wife, shocked and devastated by infidelity, and she was. But beneath that raw, legitimate pain, a colder, more calculating part of her was observing, analyzing. Julian's relief when she focused solely on the affair was palpable. He was almost eager to confess to this lesser crime, to absorb her anger, as if it could shield him from the far greater exposure she now suspected. I need time, she told them both. her voice devoid of emotion. "I need to think." She asked Julian to move into the guest room. He agreed meekly. Chloe, after a torrent of tearful apologies Eleanor barely registered, fled from their home. That afternoon, Eleanor made her first call to Dr. Evelyn Reed, a therapist recommended by a discreet acquaintance. "I think I need to talk to someone," she'd said, her voice surprisingly steady. "My life, it's not what I thought it was." The initial sessions with Dr. Reed were a torrent of grief and anger, primarily focused on the affair. The therapist, a woman in her early 50s with calm, intelligent eyes, listened patiently, offering not solutions, but a safe space for Eleanor to voice the unbearable. "The betrayal of a spouse is profound, Eleanor," Dr. Reed said gently. "The betrayal by a close friend, equally so. To experience both simultaneously is a trauma of significant magnitude." But even as she processed the emotional devastation of the infidelity, the overheard conversation in the office echoed in Eleanor's mind. Marcus's ledger, the Ashworth property, zoning. These were not the words of illicit lovers. They were the vocabulary of something else entirely. Driven by a desperate need to understand the full extent of the deceit, Eleanor began her own quiet investigation. Late at night, after Julian was asleep in the guest room, she would go to the study, her study now, and pore over the firm's financial records. She was an architect, not an accountant, but her eye for detail was sharp. She focused on the Ashworth property, a dilapidated warehouse district on the outskirts of the city that their firm had recently been contracted to assess for redevelopment potential. She found irregularities almost immediately, inflated invoices from shell corporations she didn't recognize, payments for consultation services with no corresponding reports, large sums moving through accounts linked to Vance family holdings, all loosely connected to the Ashworth project. Julian, it seemed, had become adept at hiding things in plain sight, confident that Eleanor, busy with design, would never look too closely at the minutiae of the financials he managed. His confidence had been her blind spot. The deeper she dug, the more alarmed she became. The numbers hinted at a level of financial manipulation that was far beyond simple mismanagement or even embezzlement for personal gain. It felt organized, systematic, and always, like a shadowy puppeteer, Uncle Marcus's name, or the names of his known associates, appeared on the periphery of these transactions. The crisp autumn beauty of Beacon Hill now felt like a cruel mockery. The historic brownstones, once symbols of stability and achievement, seemed to hide dark secrets behind their elegant facades. The city she loved felt tainted. Her home, once a sanctuary, was now a crime scene of a different kind. The evidence not bloodstains, but falsified spreadsheets and coded emails. One evening, sifting through old project files, she found a proposal for a luxury condo development in the Back Bay from several years prior, a project that had been abruptly shelved. Attached were notes in Julian's handwriting, referencing meetings with Uncle Marcus and expressing anxiety about unforeseen complications and keeping the investors happy. It was another piece of the puzzle, hinting at a longer history of Julian's entanglement with his uncle's dealings. The weight of it all was crushing. She felt isolated, adrift in a sea of deceit. The few friends she might have confided in were part of Julian and Chloe's circle, their loyalties now suspect. Her brother, David, a history professor in California, was a loving but distant support. Whatever it is, you're strong enough to handle it," he'd said over the phone, his voice full of concern when she'd vaguely alluded to difficulties. "But you don't have to handle it alone." He was right. This was too big, too complex, too potentially dangerous for her to navigate by herself. The fear, once a dull ache, was now a sharp, insistent pang. This wasn't just about a broken marriage. It was about financial crimes, about powerful, ruthless people. It was time to call in a professional, not just a therapist, but someone who could delve into the murky depths of what she was beginning to uncover. She remembered a name mentioned by a lawyer she'd consulted briefly for a zoning dispute years ago, Amelia Holloway, a private investigator with a reputation for tenacity and a background in financial crimes. With a trembling hand, Eleanor picked up her phone. The decision felt like crossing a Rubicon. There would be no going back. The carefully constructed life of Eleanor Vance was over. The question now was what, if anything, could be salvaged from the ruins. Amelia Amy Holloway was not what Eleanor had expected. In her mid-30s, with a shock of short, dark hair, bright, intelligent eyes, and a no-nonsense demeanor, she exuded an air of quiet competence rather than trenchcoat mystique. Her office, a small, possibly cluttered space in a nondescript building downtown, was a world away from the polished elegance of Vance & Vance design. Eleanor, perched on the edge of a worn client chair, recounted her story, starting with the discovery of the affair and leading to the overheard conversation and her own amateur sleuthing into the firm's finances. She laid out copies of the suspicious invoices and spreadsheets she'd found, her voice low and steady, belying the turmoil inside. Amy listened intently, occasionally jotting notes, her expression unreadable. When Eleanor finished, there was a moment of silence. The only sound was the distant wail of a siren. "Mrs. Vance," Amy said finally, her voice calm and direct. "What you're describing, if your suspicions are correct, goes far beyond marital infidelity. This has the hallmarks of a sophisticated financial fraud, possibly involving money laundering and conspiracy." Eleanor nodded, a cold dread settling deeper. Hearing it articulated so baldly by a professional made it terrifyingly real. "Your husband's uncle, Marcus Vance," Amy continued, tapping a pen on her notepad. "He's a significant player in Boston real estate and development, has been for decades, well-connected, old money, not someone to be taken lightly." "I'm beginning to understand that," Eleanor said quietly. "To do this properly, Mrs. Vance, will require a thorough investigation. Financial forensics, surveillance if necessary, background checks. It can be intrusive and potentially costly. Are you prepared for that?" Eleanor met Amy's gaze. "I need to know the truth, Miss Holloway. All of it. Whatever it takes." The words felt like a vow. Her life had been built on a lie. She could not continue to live that way. Over the next few weeks, Amy Holloway and her small team delved into the intricate web Eleanor had begun to uncover. They operated with a discretion that was both unnerving and reassuring. Amy provided Eleanor with regular, concise updates, her findings painting an increasingly damning picture. The Ashworth property, Amy discovered, was central to a much larger scheme. Marcus Vance, through a series of shell corporations and straw buyers, had been quietly acquiring derelict properties in that area for years, depressing their value. The redevelopment proposal from Vance & Vance, which Julian was spearheading, was intended to be the catalyst for a sudden rezoning application. If approved, the land value would skyrocket, netting Marcus and his hidden partners a fortune. Vance & Vance Design Collaborative was being used to lend legitimacy to the project, and, more insidiously, as a conduit for illicit funds, inflated contracts, kickbacks disguised as consultation fees, all meticulously, if imperfectly, buried in the company's books by Julian. Chloe Maxwell's role was murkier. Amy found evidence that Chloe's art consultancy business had been used to purchase several overpriced obscure artworks for properties owned by Marcus's shell companies, suggesting she might be involved in moving or disguising assets. Her relationship with Julian, Amy theorized, might have been partly strategic on her part, or she might have been manipulated by Julian or even Marcus. Drawn into the scheme through a combination of greed and desperation. Eleanor listened to these revelations in Amy's office, or sometimes over encrypted calls, feeling a strange detachment, as if she were observing the destruction of someone else's life. The Julian she knew, or thought she knew, the charming if sometimes insecure partner, was dissolving, replaced by the image of a man deeply compromised, a willing participant in his family's corruption. The betrayal of their marriage vows paled in comparison to this calculated erosion of their shared professional integrity. During this period, Sophia Hayes, the junior architect, approached Eleanor. Her usually bright demeanor was clouded with worry. "Mrs. Vance," she began hesitantly one afternoon when they were alone in the blueprint room. "I don't want to cause trouble, but I've noticed some irregularities in the billing for the Ashworth project. Some of the consultant fees Mr. Vance has approved seem unusually high, and the documentation is vague. I mentioned it to him and to Miss Maxwell when she was in last week, and they both brushed it off." Mr. Vance seemed almost angry. Eleanor looked at the earnest young woman, a wave of gratitude mixing with her despair. "Sophia," she said gently, "thank you for telling me. I appreciate your diligence and your courage." Sophia's intuition had been right, just as Eleanor's had. It was a small, grim vindication. The climax arrived with the chilling precision of a demolition. Amy called Eleanor for an urgent meeting. "I have something definitive," she said, her voice unusually grave. "It's worse than we thought." In her office, Amy laid out a series of documents, bank transfers, property deeds in the names of offshore corporations, and most damningly, a copy of a secret ledger, Marcus's ledger, that one of Amy's contacts had managed to obtain. It detailed a network of payments, kickbacks, and profit sharing related to the Ashworth scheme and other older deals, implicating not just Julian and Chloe, but several city officials and other prominent business figures. Julian's signature was on several key documents authorizing transfers and verifying falsified invoices. "Marcus Vance isn't just bending the rules, Mrs. Vance," Amy said, her eyes holding Eleanor's. "He's running a criminal enterprise, and your husband is neck-deep in it." Chloe Maxwell appears to be a willing, if perhaps secondary, player. Eleanor stared at the papers, her vision tunneling. The sheer scale of the deception was breathtaking. The carefully curated life, the beautiful home, the successful business, all built on a foundation of criminality. The air in the small office felt thick, suffocating. That evening, Eleanor confronted Julian. Not in anger, but with a cold, terrifying calm. She laid copies of Amy's evidence on the polished mahogany dining table in their Beacon Hill brownstone, the room where they had hosted so many elegant dinner parties, weaving illusions of success and happiness. Julian, who had been attempting a strained normalcy, trying to win her back with small gestures and talk of marriage counseling, blanched when he saw the documents. His charming facade shattered, revealing the terrified, morally bankrupt man beneath. "Eleanor, I can explain," he stammered, his eyes darting from the papers to her impassive face. "Can you, Julian?" Her voice was quiet, devoid of accusation, yet heavy with the weight of irrefutable truth. "Can you explain why our firm, our legacy, has been used to launder money? Can you explain your signature on these transfer authorizations to offshore accounts? Can you explain Uncle Marcus's ledger?" He sank into a chair, his head in his hands. The confession, when it came, was a torrent of weakness, greed, and fear. He'd been drawn in gradually, he claimed. It started years ago, with small favors for Uncle Marcus, a way to gain favor in the powerful Vance family, to feel like he measured up to their expectations, perhaps even to Eleanor's own formidable competence. The Ashworth deal was supposed to be his big score, the one that would finally secure his position. Chloe had been an escape, someone who didn't judge, who seemed to understand the pressure he was under. He admitted she eventually became aware of the financial dealings and, enticed by the promise of a cut, had willingly played her part. "Marcus, he has a way of making you feel like you have no choice," Julian whispered, his voice hoarse. "He controls everything, everyone in the family." As Julian's confession unspooled, the doorbell rang, a sharp, imperious sound that cut through the tense atmosphere. Eleanor, her heart pounding, knew instinctively who it would be. She opened the door to find Marcus Vance standing on her doorstep, impeccably dressed, his silver hair gleaming under the gaslight, his expression one of cold displeasure. He was flanked by a younger man, presumably a lawyer or an associate. "Eleanor, my dear," Marcus said, his voice smooth as silk, yet with an underlying menace. "Julian tells me you've been unduly concerned about some family business matters. Perhaps we could have a little chat, clear up any misunderstandings." His eyes flickered past her, towards the dining room where Julian sat, a broken figure. This was it, the moment of confrontation. The patriarch himself, come to manage the situation, to ensure the family secrets remained buried. Eleanor felt a tremor of fear, but also a surge of cold anger. She stepped aside. "Come in, Marcus," she said, her voice surprisingly steady. "Julian and I were just discussing your business matters." The psychological chess match that followed was brutal. Marcus didn't overtly threaten. He was too sophisticated for that. Instead, he spoke of family loyalty, of the unfortunate consequences of airing dirty laundry, of the damage that could be done to reputations, hers included, if certain sensitive information became public. He implied that Julian was merely a pawn, misguided but ultimately protected by the family. He hinted at financial settlements, at ways to make this all go away quietly. He was trying to buy her silence, to intimidate her into complicity. Eleanor listened, her gaze unwavering. The opulent surroundings of her Beacon Hill home, once a source of pride, now felt like a gilded cage. She looked at Julian, crumpled and defeated, She thought of Chloe, her friend, now revealed as a calculating opportunist. And she thought of herself, of the years invested in a life built on lies. When Marcus finally paused, expecting her acquiescence, Eleanor spoke, her voice clear and resolute. "There will be no settlement, Marcus," she said. "There will be no silence. What you and Julian and your associates have done is criminal, and it will not go away quietly." Marcus Vance's eyes, cold and reptilian, narrowed. The mask of civility slipped, revealing the ruthlessness beneath. "You will regret this, Eleanor," he said softly, a chilling promise. "You are making a very powerful enemy." "I believe," Eleanor replied, meeting his gaze without flinching. "I already have." After a tense, loaded silence, Marcus Vance and his associate departed, leaving behind a palpable chill. The battle lines were drawn. Eleanor knew with absolute certainty that there was no turning back. The life she had known was over. The future was a terrifying unknown, but it would be a future built on truth, no matter how painful the construction. The days that followed were a blur of agonizing decisions and devastating consequences. Armed with Amy Holloway's meticulously compiled evidence and Julian's tearful, if self-serving confession, Eleanor made the hardest choice of her life. Accompanied by Amy, she walked into the imposing granite building that housed the Massachusetts Attorney General's office and laid out the entire sordid tale. The ensuing investigation was swift and far-reaching. The Ashworth property deal became the linchpin that unraveled Marcus Vance's empire of corruption. News of the scandal broke like a thunderclap over Boston's tight-knit business and social circles. "Vance family scion arrested in multi-million-dollar fraud scheme," screamed the headlines. Vance and Vance Design Collaborative, its name now irrevocably tainted, was frozen, its assets seized as part of the ongoing investigation. Julian was arrested, his tear-streaked face a stark image on the evening news, a far cry from the charming architect who had once graced the pages of design magazines. Chloe Maxwell, implicated as an accomplice, cooperated with investigators in exchange for a more lenient sentence, her dreams of art world legitimacy and financial security dissolving into public disgrace. Uncle Marcus, defiant to the end, hired a team of high-powered lawyers, but the evidence against him was overwhelming. For Eleanor, the public fallout was brutal. She was the wife, the business partner. Inevitably, some suspicion and gossip clung to her, despite her role as the whistleblower. The Beacon Hill society that had once embraced her now regarded her with a mixture of pity, curiosity, and thinly veiled judgment. The beautiful brownstone, once a symbol of her achievements, felt like a mausoleum, every object a painful reminder of a life that had been a lie. She initiated divorce proceedings, a sterile legal process that couldn't begin to encompass the depth of her grief and betrayal. The loss of her marriage was intertwined with the loss of her firm, her professional identity, her closest friendship. There were days when the weight of it all threatened to suffocate her. She retreated into the sanctuary of Dr. Reed's office, where she could unravel the tangled knot of her emotions, the rage, the sorrow, the profound disillusionment. "You're grieving, Eleanor," Dr. Reed said gently during one session, as Eleanor stared out at the bleak December cityscape. "Not just for your marriage, but for the life you believed you had, for the trust that was shattered. It's a profound loss, and it's okay to feel broken." "Broken," Eleanor repeated, the word tasting like dust. "I feel hollowed out, like the foundations of my world were just sand." "Perhaps," Dr. Reed suggested, "but even when foundations crumble, there's an opportunity to rebuild, on solid ground this time, with materials of your own choosing." Her brother David was a lifeline, calling daily from California, his steadfast, uncomplicated love a balm to her raw wounds. Sophia Hayes, the loyal junior architect, also proved an unexpected source of support, helping Eleanor navigate the logistical nightmare of winding down the legitimate projects of Vance and Vance, her quiet competence a small beacon in the overwhelming darkness. The legal process dragged on. Julian, facing irrefutable evidence, eventually pleaded guilty to several charges and received a significant prison sentence. Chloe was given probation and community service, her career and reputation in ruins. She left Boston, disappearing into obscurity. Marcus Vance's trial was set to be a lengthy, complex affair. Eleanor found herself adrift. The structure of her life, the demanding schedule of the firm, the social obligations, the routines of her marriage had vanished. In its place was a vast, empty space. Some days she could barely bring herself to get out of bed. The Boston winter mirrored her internal landscape, cold, barren, seemingly endless. The charming cobblestone streets of Beacon Hill, once a delight, now felt like a cage. Each familiar corner a reminder of what she had lost. Slowly, painstakingly, with Dr. Reed's guidance, Eleanor began to sift through the wreckage. She had to confront not only Julian's and Chloe's betrayals, but her own blind spots. Had she been too focused on the outward trappings of success, too invested in maintaining the illusion of a perfect life? Had her own need for control and order made her unwilling to see the cracks that had been forming for years? These were difficult, painful questions, and the answers were not always comfortable. She sold the Beacon Hill brownstone, the proceeds tied up in legal complexities, but eventually providing her with a modest financial cushion. The sale felt like a liberation, a shedding of a skin that no longer fit. She moved into a small, modern apartment in a less pretentious neighborhood, a blank canvas that held no ghosts. There were moments of intense loneliness, of a grief so profound it felt physical. She missed the partnership, the shared history, even the mundane routines of her old life. But interwoven with the pain was a growing sense of clarity. The American dream she had pursued, the power couple, the thriving business, the elegant home, had proven to be a fragile, hollow construct. True strength, she was beginning to realize, lay not in external achievements, but in internal integrity. 1 year later, the chill of early spring was giving way to a tentative warmth. Boston was awakening, buds appearing on the trees in the public garden, the Charles River glinting under a pale sun. Eleanor Vance walked through the common, a thermos of coffee in her hand, a sketchbook under her arm. She was thinner, her face etched with the lines of her ordeal, but her eyes held a new light. Not the bright, ambitious gleam of before, but a quieter, more profound luminescence. The legal dramas were mostly behind her. Julian was serving his sentence. Marcus Vance had been convicted on multiple counts, his empire dismantled. Eleanor had testified, her voice clear and steady, speaking her truth without embellishment or malice. It had been an ordeal, but also a necessary act of closure. She had started a new firm, a tiny one-woman operation. Eleanor Vance Design. Her office was a sun-drenched corner of her new apartment, her projects modest but meaningful. She was currently working on the designs for a new women's shelter in Dorchester, a pro bono project that resonated deeply with her own journey of rebuilding. She also had a few small residential commissions, clients who valued her talent, and perhaps her story of resilience. Her design philosophy had shifted. The pursuit of sleek, expensive perfection no longer held the same allure. Now, she was drawn to projects that fostered community, sustainability, and authenticity. Her work was becoming infused with a quiet integrity that mirrored her own internal transformation. She still saw Dr. Reed, though less frequently. The sessions were now less about raw grief and more about navigating the path forward, about integrating the lessons of the past year into a new, more authentic way of being. She had learned the devastating cost of secrets and lies, the corrosive power of greed. But she had also discovered an inner strength she hadn't known she possessed, a resilience forged in the crucible of profound betrayal. She rarely thought of Chloe anymore, the pain of that particular betrayal having dulled to a scar, a reminder of a friendship lost to envy and poor choices. Julian was a more complex ache, a mixture of sorrow for the man he might have been and a steely resolve that she had done the right thing for herself and for a larger sense of justice. As she sat on a bench overlooking the swan boats, sketching idly, a sense of peace settled over her, as delicate and hopeful as the spring sunshine. It wasn't the triumphant, picture-perfect happiness she had once strived for. It was something quieter, deeper, more hard-won. The perfect life had been an illusion. This new life, with its imperfections and uncertainties, felt infinitely more real, more her own. She had learned to trust her intuition, that inner compass that had tried to warn her. She had learned that true control came not from meticulously managing external circumstances, but from aligning her actions with her core values. And she had learned that even from the most devastating ruins, something new, something stronger, something more authentic could be built. Eleanor Vance took a deep breath of the cool spring air. The path ahead was still unfolding, but for the first time in a long time, she felt a sense of cautious optimism. She was no longer defined by her husband, her prestigious firm, or the elegant facade of Beacon Hill. She was simply Eleanor, an architect, a survivor, a woman who had walked through fire and emerged, not unscathed, but tempered, wiser, and, in the truest sense of the word, free. The city of Boston, once a symbol of her shattered dreams, now felt like a place of quiet possibility. Its historic stones a testament to endurance, its future, like hers, waiting to be designed.